My name is Chris Lefebvre. I'll be moderating this panel entitled Designing for Revenue, It's Not All Fun and Games, which is a really good title. I'm not sure if we're not necessarily going to hit the objective, or I'm not sure there's a perfect alignment between the objective of the talk and the actual title. I just kind of like the title and ran with it. What we're hoping to discuss here is we're hoping to look at, where the marriage between sort of the artistic intent of game developers and business success, and looking at how we can bridge those better. And so we've got an amazing dais here today. I'm joined by Dave Rohrl, who's over 25 years of experience in the industry, works as a mobile game consultant under the Mobile Game Doctor. Yep. Most recently, you see his work in the game Trailer Park Boys, published by Eastside Games on April 20th, 420, intentionally. Quick, show of hands from the audience. Who here has played Trailer Park Boys? I have.
Are we in Canada?
We're not in Canada, so that's not surprising. It's a very Canadian IP. I definitely recommend checking out the show first, and then the game, or both. I don't know. You can get it. Yeah, either way. We're also joined by Konrad Stanczak. You can actually check out his game, the Indie Prize section, Jumping Joe, solid title, published by Deep Fish. When did that come out again? Sorry? When did Jumping Joe come out?
In June.
June. Solid game. And we're also joined by Alex Mendelev of DoubleJump Games, formerly Tiny Mob. DoubleJump's most recent release was Slash Mobs, I believe. Idle game, gorgeous art. Anybody here played Slash Mobs? Anybody? Anybody here play idle games? Because I think these two games are both idle games. Anyway, Slash Mobs is also gorgeous. I've seen what they're working on, but I'm not going to discuss it for fear of reprisal, violent reprisal. Okay, great. So I'm basically going to turn things over here, but as mentioned, we kind of want to delve into the marriage of creative passion and business success. And I was thinking we could just do this chronologically. So you're a game developer, you want to become a game developer, you have a passion for games, you start diving into the process. How can developers best start that process? With your experience, what have you learned about diving into game development with the hopes of building a career on it? And Dave, I'm going to turn this over to you to start.
Yep. Thanks. So, there are a lot of different approaches to game development. A lot of how you approach it and what you start depends on what you want to get out of it, right? Game development is on some level an art form. There are those who pursue it as a commercial art and those who pursue it as kind of a personal statement, right? I have some good friends that are actually instructors of fine arts programs for game design, where they're not really talking about markets, they're not really talking about revenue streams, but they're really talking about kind of media theory and how do you make your place in the world. If you want to approach game development as a commercial art, if you want to make money, it behooves you to understand markets, to understand how to target and address them, and it behooves you to understand your business model and to really put that at the core of how you're designing your experience. If your experience is designed to make money, if that's your intent, you need to understand how the sausage is made.
So I guess what I want to explore, what I've found is that people who start a career in game development often have, are gamers. They come from a place where, they played games as a kid, they love it as an art form, and there's something that they want to be a part of. How can we avoid somebody working on a game for longer than a year? Is basically how can we, maybe it's the right thing to do. Maybe, working on a game for that long will pay off. But I've seen a lot of people work on games, particularly even in the casual mobile space, where, they spend 5 years working on a casual game because they decided to build the engine. And I just feel like that's lunacy. I feel like it's absolutely insane. So, how can we prevent that here as a panel?
Am I going to do the awkward mic? So I think going back to your original question is, assuming that you want to create a game or a game studio as a business rather than just a project, I think one of the first things you should probably look at is how is your approach going to be different than everybody else's approach in this room or in this country or in this world. Because ultimately, I think when people start making games, they kind of do that for the creative freedom of making games because they think it's a beautiful thing, it's an art form. But ultimately, if you want to continue to create games going forward, it needs to be an operating business. And so think about it from the perspective of what are you going to do differently? And that thing cannot be my game is prettier than theirs. It has to be kind of founded in with some pillars around kind of markets and how you're going to compete and how you're going to get new users. I think that's one of the core things you need to do. And whereas previously it was probably enough to kind of have developer relationships with platforms and try to get features. Those features don't last very long. It's days, it's not months, it's not years. You need to have an alternative approach to that.
So I guess, yeah, taking it to platforms, obviously the type of game you make is going to vary, but what advice, Konrad, do you have based on your recent experiences with Jumping Joe's launch in terms of designing for a platform?
Designing for a platform. Well, you need to stick to a single platform at the start. Absolutely, I think that's the best option to do, because each time we approached an idea to split into several platforms, it turned out neither of them went as well as it should. And well, probably then you should follow up if you want to continue on making the same game for other platforms.
Yeah, I think focus is a widely underestimated resource in game development. One of the things that I find myself working with a lot of developers on is kind of concept bloat and feature growth and folks taking on more than they can get done in their target development window. One of the things I often find myself telling teams is that a game with a few great features is actually a better game with the same great features and then a bunch of mediocre features stuck on top. Focusing down, limiting what you're trying to achieve, particularly in V1 of your game, is a huge boost to getting something awesome out there.
Alex, in terms of, back in the Tiny Mob days, you had experience on both mobile and Steam, and it seems like a lot of developers are moving away from mobile into Steam, possibly because they feel like discoverability is such a massive challenge. Well, in terms of, your experiences, you went from mobile to Steam. How did that all shake out? We know how it shook out. You can look it up, but what did you see? Did you feel like it was quote unquote easier on Steam, or how did that all kind of pan out?
So yeah, good question. We certainly thought it was going to be easier on Steam, and that's why one of the reasons we went to Steam. We also felt that from a development perspective, the type of game we were making after kind of prototyping, we realized that it was not going to be as good of a mobile game as it could be a PC game, and so that kind of drove our decision to go to Steam more than kind of potential discoverability. We certainly hoped that discoverability would be better on Steam than it is on mobile. I don't particularly think that proved out to be the case for us. We're still in early access. Early access wasn't nearly as fruitful for us as we had expected it would be. Yeah, the decision to going to a different platform and kind of being a slightly larger fish in a smaller pond was part of the decision criteria for us.
Was there any design lessons you learned going from mobile that you were able to port into Steam, or was it sort of like a brand new approach?
It's a totally different beast. I think we felt, having done several mobile games previously, going to Steam, there are challenges that are not there on Steam that you have to deal with mobile. Certainly the size of your download on mobile is a significant challenge for some people, especially if the size of your game or the size of the experience is hefty. That is not really a challenge on Steam, and so you're able to do very different things. So that was really nice. But yeah, from a design perspective, you kind of have to think about, now you have a keyboard and you have a mouse, and what are the types of things you can do that you kind of been limited artificially by the mobile platform previously.
Dave, one for you. So, looking at, platform choices and things like discoverability and the challenges there, and what advice are you giving developers who are putting together a game that, to push it towards the future, which is ultimately like the number one source of downloads for most of the developers out there outside of like a solid UA budget? Yeah, exactly that. What are you recommending in terms of design on getting that feature?
Got to tell you, I'm really the wrong guy to ask about that. So I have a variety of other folks that I work with that are platform relations specialists that can dive deep on the feature side. Just from the casual bits I have, building the relationship with the platform up front is really important. It traffics much more on personal relationship than you would expect. The platforms love exclusivity, right? So anything you can give them that is just going to be there really helps with featuring. The platforms love to see you showing off the latest capabilities of the hardware and the OS. So anything you can lean into there. And they don't like to feature your game if it stars marijuana. Learned that one the hard way at Eastside.
Yeah, for background, Eastside, who recently came out with Trailer Park Boys, have a long history of developing games that are entirely focused on growing weed. I'm not sure how this particular region in Canada we're pretty lax about things like that. You can just like go to like a store and buy it, but here it's probably a little bit different, maybe. And I think the other main thing that people tend to do, I mean, because securing that feature is so important for installs, is to look at publishers. And so, I mean, Konrad, you definitely got some experience with features and with publishers. In terms of designing a game for publishers, what can you tell our audience about that?
That's a good question.
Sorry?
That's a good question.
No, thank you.
Well, my advice would be try not to listen to your publishers.
So let me just push back on something here, though. Like there's this sort of implicit assumption underlying the last couple of questions that, having a user acquisition budget is kind of a fantasy that most of us can't even afford to indulge. And really, my whole game, you asked me about platform relations. It's not really what I do. My whole game is about trying to nudge your KPIs northward to the point where you can afford to acquire, to the point where your LTV and even your current revenue in the early part of the user lifecycle enables you to acquire first at small scale and then at larger and larger and larger scale. And I think if you can't shape your game to a point where it's going to meet those standards, to the point where users are going to deliver value, you have a very hard road ahead of you.
And Konrad, I think you can both speak to this a little bit. I don't think it makes sense to buy users in the casual mobile space, almost at all. I think for most games, I don't think the LTVs are ever going to get there. I think you'd be crazy to go. I mean, outside of running your own internal Facebook campaigns where you can work off minimal budgets and try to scale that up, $500 here or there. I think running an in-app ad campaign for something like Jumping Joe is just completely untenable. And I'm sure your publisher didn't do that either, right?
No, they did not.
So. Yeah, I mean, you can nudge those KPIs as much as you want. I think at certain games, you get into you produce IAP, you produce spending users for sure. You can start looking at that. But I think for a lot of the casual mobile developers who are putting together an arcade game, the reality of a user acquisition budget is completely out of the question. And I mean, you guys are working on.
Yeah. And to follow up a bit on this, you have to keep your publisher in check, but there's only that much you can do to make sure he's doing all he can. And very often he can do much.
I think also if you're really not planning on driving up LTV, if you're not planning on driving significant purchase, you've got to keep your budget in check, right? The revenue expectations on your game are going to be relatively humble. So I think, spending multiple millions in development on a game that you're intending to have, ad monetized through pure attention is not going to be a good bet for your business.
I got one specific question I want to ask Konrad, and I want to come back to you in a second, Alex. So in terms of designing for publishers, so Konrad and I have been chatting since Casual Connect Singapore, and one thing that we talked about specifically was the inclusion of Donald Trump in your game art icon. I was completely opposed to the idea. I think, well, for many reasons, I was completely opposed to it. We won't get fully into my politics, but you ended up doing it.
Yeah, it was quite a discussion with the guys, and we came into somewhat conclusion that we will feature Trump, but we want to feature our stuff as well. So yeah, that was consensus. Maybe it wasn't right. But honestly, I was also opposed to the Trump idea. But well, they liked it. But why not try?
And how did it pan out?
I have no idea.
Okay, so Alex, you guys are doing a lot. I mean, and we're sort of, we can kind of follow the track that we're on here. We're kind of moving through discoverability. We'll find ourselves in retention in a second, which I'm going to definitely lean heavily on you for, Dave. But over at DoubleJump, you know, one of your guys' biggest competitive advantages is your relationships with streamers and YouTubers. So what advice do you have for developers? And we were just chatting before, like, hey, if you see any good mobile games that are designed for streaming, let us know. So what are you guys doing? What's your advice designing a game that is a good fit for streaming and YouTubers, but particularly in the mobile space?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, going back to your kind of previous question, which is more designing for publishers. I don't particularly think you should be designing your game for publishers at all. In fact, I think if you think that your launch strategy is to get a publisher and have them launch your game, you're probably doing it wrong. Because publishers are just like everybody else. They're going to invest money in games that are going to back out more money effectively. And so if they're only going to do user acquisition in the event that this user acquisition has positive return. And so if you just want to not think about it and offload to publishers your entire launch strategy, then you're probably not going to be incredibly successful. What you should be thinking about is a mix of kind of a mixed approach of how you're going to get players to play your game, and that could be influencers for some games. It could be user acquisition spend. It could be a variety of other things. One of them could be trying a publisher as well. But think about that before you start designing the game, because your game design will kind of lend itself to either be publishable or not in certain channels.
So my latest question, specifically designing for streamers.
Yeah.
What are you doing there?
So for us, it's important to have a game that streamers are able to play with their audience and with each other. And so multiplayer games definitely work better for us. In fact, real-time multiplayer games. So if anybody has real-time multiplayer games that they would like to see in market and they're not in market yet, I'm happy to chat.
Okay, great. Well, let's move further down the funnel a little bit and look at how we can better design games for retention. Dave, I know that this is kind of your meat and potatoes, and obviously a genius at it. I think I had to force quit Trailer Park Boys by about season 25 because it was just getting too aggressive, and I was this close to spending money, which is a line for me. It's like once I start, I'll never stop. So I'm an ad guy. I'm heavily engaged. My usage rate's very high, but. As you're coming in and you're consulting, particularly Trailer Park Boys, obviously, you came in kind of late in the project and kind of turned that whole thing around. For our developers out there who are building casual mobile games, what advice do you have in terms of building those retention mechanics and keeping people in game?
So, I think one of the things that's a little hard to solve for and really important to think about is you think about building a free-to-play game, you're trying to build something that users are going to stick around in, not for a few days, not for a few weeks, but for months, for years, right? And having a clear vision up front of how a user is going to continue growing in the game, how it's going to continue to be exciting and compelling for them when they've been going through the same core loop for multiple years is challenging. And it's something you need to think about up front if you aspire to have your game become a hobby and to grow that long-term user community. So you've got to think, how are you paying off in terms of content? How are you paying off in terms of functionality? How is that experience going to keep on getting better for the user month after month after month?
So what specifically in Trailer Park Boys have you implemented, and how have the results of that been? I guess, can you share numbers? Like, what are the retention numbers in Trailer Park Boys right now?
It's not really my data to share. That really belongs to eSide, but I'll say that the retention numbers that we've seen are kind of above par for a typical casual game. They're slightly lower than market-leading idle games, but the ARPDAU in the product is more than double what you see in a typical idle game, well above that. So we built a system that we thought was going to be really good for retention in terms of delivering linear content and bringing a little more structure and strategy to idle gameplay. tried to build storylines that we thought would be hooky and compelling for Trailer Park Boys fans, and kind of spaced out the gameplay around that, and then built a gacha system that we made very, very central to user progress, so that you can make your way through the game very, very slowly by grinding, but there's clear benefits to monetization. And that strong backbone of monetization coupled with solid retention has enabled us to grow the game through acquisition, right?
For those of you who haven't played Trailer Park Boys, one thing that they did really well that I enjoy is the use of storylines, straight from the show. Some original, but mostly from the show. So if you're a fan of the TV show, you get to enjoy those moments in game. And I think you touched on this in your talk in Seattle, where users would keep playing just to see what happens next. Get to that next cutscene. Did you find that this was the case with people who weren't familiar with the show? Was the storyline gripping for non-fans of the TV show or people who were unaware?
Yeah, I mean, we and the licensors are really happy with not only how the game has appealed to existing fans of the show, but how it's brought new people to the IP, which is pretty niche, right? It's very Canadian. It's not particularly popular outside of Canada. But it's got a very distinctive point of view and sense of humor and a really lovable cast of characters who are all self-destructive idiots. So that's kind of fun to watch. So we've actually brought a lot of new viewers to the TV show from the game, which has really made the licensors happy.
Alex, going to you on the retention side. So you guys are focused on multiplayer games right now, and I'm kind of curious, in terms of, your experience with Tiny Realms as multiplayer. How are you keeping the experience fresh enough that people keep wanting to play? And I guess I think one of the main things that's going to impact that is probably matchmaking. But how's that being managed?
Yeah, good question. So in a multiplayer game, obviously, especially as a synchronous or even async multiplayer game, part of the experience is kind of enjoying battles with other players, and so a lot of your experience and enjoyment that you get from the game is by having and coming back and having experiences with others, and so that helps a lot. It's a lot easier to get higher engagement, we feel, in a multiplayer game. Because you have that, connection with other people in the game already, and that's core to your experience. Whereas an idle game or a casual game, you're kind of playing by yourself, and so you're only coming back if the previous experience has been really, really meaningful for you. So in that sense, for sure. Now, touching on matching is in a multiplayer battle game is a very difficult problem, it turns out, to solve. It's you're in an environment where you have to kind of decide as a game developer, do you want to be matching people based on skill, based on kind of how well they've upgraded, and you need to track that experience kind of all the way through the game, and so it kind of becomes a difficult challenge to overcome over time.
Konrad, one thing that I loved about your game when I judged it for Indie Prize Singapore was, I've been telling indie developers this forever, is that we need to see more progression in casual arcade. So you've got a fairly basic game, but your progression, you have RPG level upgrade mechanics in your game, and you've got all kinds of content. It's all there. Did that make much of a difference when you look at? Yeah,
it did absolutely. We are talking about doubling the retention rates at least.
So for anybody,
and it wasn't that complex how you describe it. It wasn't.
So sophisticated. So do go check out Jumping Joe when you get a chance. It's in the third row or whatever in the Indie Prize Showcase area. Solid progression mechanics for what is effectively just an arcade game, a very simple arcade game. Trump icon aside, one of my favorites there. All right, well, let's continue moving down the funnel. So now let's look at, you managed to launch your game. Congratulations, you managed to keep some users. That's great. Now you need to start making some money. Now it's really it's time to turn this love of games into a business. What have you learned from some of your previous experiences that are going to be going into your multiplayer games in terms of how you're going to balance that fair and fun with the need to make money? So
we're kind of making very, very different types of games with DoubleJump. What we've learned is, I think, more less about specifically on monetization and more about kind of being true with yourself with respect to what your expectations are and what the top challenges are going to be when you launch the game. And one of the top is how are you going to bring in users at a reasonable cost that are going to back out to be a profitable business. And if you don't have a clear answer to how you're going to do that, then you should really stop making your game and think about how are you going to do that. Because most of us, I think, in this room, think that we're going to make the best game out there and it's just going to win because it's so amazing. That's really just delaying the inevitable of you're about to launch your game and you do not have a launch strategy. And that's when you kind of start reaching out to publishers and you're like, hey, can you have a launch strategy for me? And that rarely works because they're gonna do the same thing that you're doing. They're gonna try some things, and if they're not gonna work, they're gonna stop working with you, which could be unfortunate. So I think what we've learned is really have an effective launch strategy that's going to differentiate you in the market. And for us, that's a variety of channels. And then specifically on monetization, I've been in monetizing free-to-play games since 2009, starting with Facebook. We're actually quite good at monetizing games, especially free-to-play games. That's rarely challenged. The challenge primarily has been in that cost of user acquisition has grown tremendously. And so even if you're amazing at monetizing your games, you may not be doing that fast enough to keep up with the growing cost of user acquisition.
Awesome. Dave, you mentioned that in Trailer Park Boys you hit double the ARPDAU typically seen in idle games, or very, very high? How?
How? Well, it's kind of a low bar, right? Idle games are typically fairly low ARPDAU games. They retain really, really well. So what they don't have in spend, they sort of tend to make up for in longevity. They tend to rely very highly on ad revenue. Generally, the way that monetization is integrated into the game isn't particularly sophisticated, so they tend to offer a couple of speed ups or multipliers and not much else, right? So IAP tends to be generally pretty low. In a lot of idle games, you'll see sort of 80-20 revenue mix of ads to IAP. And for Trailer Park Boys, we decided we wanted to try and flip that, and did successfully. So one of the things that we did is really integrate a monetizable system into the core of gameplay, right? So we have a gacha system that drops cards and a secondary non-inflationary currency that allows you to sort of upgrade the characters in the game, and then we simply made upgrading the characters necessary in order to progress through the game at an acceptable pace. So this means you have an accelerating need for the secondary currency, you have an accelerating need for these cards, but we built that monetization right into the core of the game rather than leaving it around the periphery or trying to figure it out later. And that was one of our central design goals after we rebooted the game, was to make sure that it could monetize. And we kind of had to, because the game was rebooted after 6 months and it was kind of spendy. So I think making sure that from the beginning of the design process, we were focusing on monetization, bringing that into the core of the gameplay, enabled us to deliver on that goal pretty easily, like almost from our first soft launch version. We were pretty close to our ARPDAU goals.
You guys did a lot of great things with, they incorporated like daily deals, like when you log in here, check out this greasy deal, you got a 24-hour countdown. So things like that are, I think, in terms of tactics for other developers, really well implemented. And you guys are doing a lot of great work with events and live ops right now, which I think kind of is a re-engagement strategy as well. Can you highlight a little bit about how that's performed? I mean, has that?
Yeah. So when we're running events, we actually see a very, very significant increase in ARPDAU. Again, it's a multiple on top of the multiple. And you can actually, if you watch the iOS top grossing charts or the Android top grossing charts on the days that we launch events, you'll often see, a leap from, number 450 on the grossing chart to number 100. For the events, what we're doing is, creating fairly short term, usually 3 or 4 day events with some great rewards that are only available inside the events and really forcing users to engage heavily or monetize in order to get those limited time rewards. So we're sort of using limited availability and urgency to really get users excited about and highly engaged with the event. And then we offer them some unique starter packs just for the event. And those have been extremely big sellers for us. I think the biggest things that we've done right, the events are very finely balanced to ensure that you really have to engage heavily to get the desirable rewards. We've cordoned off the rewards inside the event so they're impossible to get outside. And then we've made sure that those rewards are quite meaningful in terms of helping you advance on the core game progression. I think those are the 3 points you really have to get right to have a successful event system.
Konrad, casual arcade developer. Oh, not exclusively, but Jumping Joe is fairly casual arcade. What was your revenue split between ad and IAP?
It's 5 to 95.
Yeah, all ads.
All ads.
Was the progression mechanics that you're able to build in, did that help at all with IAP, or is it?
We did not design with this intent, honestly. All we did is make a special offer that comes up on a specific circumstances, but that was pretty much it.
And what were you doing on the ad side to encourage engagement with ads? You were using a mix of rewarded and forced ads, if I recall correctly.
We were specifically focused to make all of the possible video ads rewarded. That was our main goal. We decided that we don't want to make a game that's constantly spamming the ads to the user. So yeah, the mechanics under this is that if you don't watch any rewarded videos at all, then you will be forced to watch an ad, but only in those circumstances. So everything else is somehow rewarded to the player with currencies, characters, or whatever.
Dave, in terms of your experience, can a game be over ad monetized? And we saw a great talk earlier talking about like engagement and usage rate, and obviously there's a certain eCPM consideration. I mean, your eCPM is going to tank if someone starts watching 10 or 12 ads. I mean, from a revenue perspective, it might be fine, but there's only so many ads to show a user before they're seeing the same thing over and over again. What have you seen? I mean, because I know that with Trailer Park Boys, there's a couple key placements, but I've seen similar games with like that are just literally ad machines. They just like sit there and you just sit there and watch ads for like an hour straight. Not that fun of a game. So we're coming back to the title. Great, designing for revenue. It's not all fun and games. Nailed it. 10 minutes. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, what's that balance look like to you?
I mean, I wish I had a precise answer for you. Actually, if you're here for Tal's talk just before this, he was saying that for most games, 2 to 3 well-crafted placements tend to be about optimum, and that's roughly what we did in Trailer Park Boys, right? So we give you a couple of key opportunities to watch ads. In general, any kind of rewarded video that the user initiates is going to pay out better for you, right? And it's going to be a better user experience, right? If that engagement is optional, it's hard for it to knock down your retention. Whereas if you're jamming up users with interstitials, things can get ugly fast. I've broken up with a few games over those interstitials. Once you start putting in 6, 8, 10 placements or just kind of queuing up unlimited views, I think you're starting to dilute your value proposition for the user. It gets messy and hard to communicate. As you said, the value of that user goes down as they engage with more and more and more ads, particularly if they're not taking installs off those ads. But, as I said earlier, a game with a fistful of really well-executed features is better than a game with a few well-executed features and a bunch of garbage around the edges. A game with 2 or 3 really well-placed, high-value, rewarded video insertions is way better than a game with 10 buttons that do who knows what.
A question for you, Alex. So in the multiplayer space, obviously things get a little bit different. I mean, you can't queue up a banner ad on a loading screen, and obviously there's matchmaking considerations and game flow. What are you guys looking at in terms of balancing your IAP, which obviously is going to be a heavy source of revenue in a mobile or a multiplayer game? What are your guys' considerations in terms of like where ads are going to fit in to your strategy?
Yeah, I mean, IAP for us is kind of the biggest consideration for monetization for sure. I think where we're looking at ads is when a player decides to kind of self-select to want to get currency. They will not be prompted to do so. They will have to go and find it and watch video or do whatever they need to do in order to get that currency. But giving the player that choice to go and find it effectively becomes a feature in the game where they can get extra currency should they want to.
Just in terms of my own experience working with multiplayer games, I would definitely sort of focus on the home screen for any rewarded video ad placement,
right?
And just make sure that people are constantly playing.
That's because you're an ad guy, yeah.
I'm a game developer too. I have a game. It's terrible. Don't find it. It's a real mess. Well, I have a question for you guys. What are you playing right now?
Well, so I've been a daily Hearthstone player for a long time. I think since open beta, maybe late closed beta. It's one of those habits I can't seem to kick. And I've developed a wicked golf clash habit recently. Really nicely put together golf simulation with an elegant metagame that I think has some great monetization prompts. They've really thought through their merchandising and their value proposition nicely.
On mobile, I practically right now play only pinballs. Zen is awesome. And on the desktop, Stellaris and some Mendelev 4x's.
I'm still addicted to Clash of Clans. Yeah. Yeah, it's sad. Yeah.
Have you played Brawl Stars? You got into that?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Good. It's okay.
I like it.
Yeah.
Cool. I've been playing a lot of. I do a lot of beta testing, so I've been playing Armajet, which was featured at Indie Prize Seattle. Great multiplayer game. You should actually definitely take a look at that. Yo and Friends, a game by Fulmer Kelly. It's the simplest game I've ever played in my life, but I can't stop. Mostly because I want to beat the developer's score because he won't work with me. I want to take him down on the leaderboards. The only place I can. And then on Steam, playing a lot of Nuclear Throne still. Actually, it's sort of just my unwind, shoot stuff, screen shake. I want to thank you guys all for joining my panel. I really appreciate you guys' insight. I hope everyone else does too. I want to thank the sponsors. I want to thank the volunteers, and I want to thank you all for attending. Thank you so much.